Hello, everyone. Welcome to RallyCast Series 3. This episode is the second episode of the series. And just really happy to have you back. I'm joined today by Carl Rosen, Head of IP Strategy at PA Consulting. And we're just here to nerd out and have a really good, interesting conversation. But Carl, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, JP, at your beautiful London offices. And also thank you for dressing up.
Yeah, tried my best. And yeah, well, as you can tell, we're not screen to screen, which is weird. I can reach out and actually...
it feels great, doesn't it?
Yeah. Really looking forward to today's conversation. Known Carl for a number of years now. He's been a panelist at a few shows and actually a few recent podcasts with other providers that I thought were very insightful. And just really looking forward to today's conversation. But introduce yourself to our audience, Carl, please.
Thank you very much, JP. It's a pleasure to be here yet again. I am heading up PA Consulting's IP strategy function. And we are interestingly positioned because we are a global innovation partner, around 4,000 employees, spanning multiple disciplines. And our bread and butter is that we fundamentally build and innovate future products and services for our clients. So IP is the name of the game. And since our inception, we have generated over 40,000 inventions. Now, within the IP space, we are very well known for our SEP transparency reports, shining lights on actual essentiality in the standard essential patent space. But we do far more than that. We work very end-to-end and holistically across the entire life cycle of IP, be that navigation of complex IP spaces, be that strategic use or creation and management of IP assets. And I'm here to share some of my thinking that I've done lately on, in particular, various issues pertaining to IP strategy in the context of AI, the multidisciplinary and dimensional role of IP assets in general, how they contribute to bottom line value. And I think that, our friendship is very much centered around having such philosophical conversations. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be here.
Yeah, no, really looking forward to it. And with PA Consulting, obviously with AI is the future, but you as an organization have been involved in some pretty big inventions in the past as well, which I think is important to look into when you're kind of forward thinking with the discussion we're going to be having today. Kind of what impacts, let's say, lack of disclosure, overregulation, and the insular nature that potentially could drive AI innovation if we don't enable a more holistic approach, as you were saying before. So that kind of brings us to today's topic, imagine if. So we're asking everyone, imagine if, to begin the podcast, the RallyCast episode. So we'll just kind of ask you, let's have a conversation, imagine if.
And I would add to that, imagine if, two aspects. The first would be, imagine if the IP of AI had appropriate IPR regimes that could allow for its effective protection, but most importantly, its productive disclosure to combat opacity and black boxing. And the second imagine if would be, imagine if everyone knew about the multidimensional value of IP assets. Now, obviously, that would mean that I would be out of a job. But I think that it's worthwhile taking a step back and just contemplating on our roles as IP strategy champions in general. It really involves quite significant education and spreading the gospel type of advocacy. I often say that the most important skill of my team is their ability to constantly reconstruct and deconstruct the value narrative of why IP makes sense to different stakeholder groups. And that kind of encapsulates much of what makes PA so rare and fundamentally different from many other, let's say, pure IP strategy services providers and pure engineering or design outlets. So those would be my two imaginative.
Yeah. And I think it all kind of comes down to the data behind it. One thing that I've always been an advocate about is the power of patent data. It's really a confirmatory indicator of where a company has decided to invest and remain investing into research and development to actually go ahead and disclose fully what they're doing to get that protection commercially and corner the market per se. But in the board level or in certain decision-making levels, the use of patent data is difficult to really explain. I wouldn't say it's a naivety. It's not. It's maybe just a blind spot because there's so much other data sources that may be more mature within these operational decision makers. And kind of where we want to go with this conversation today is what impact does overregulation, especially at such an early phase of this revolution, like the Industrial Revolution saw a massive increase in patents for mechanical. How ready was a patent office to examine that, understanding the mechanisms of it? How much is overregulation going to drive innovators to not disclose because they can't disclose, and like you were saying with trade secrets? And then how does that impact the data that's being used to make decisions?
I think that one way of approaching this is also to look at the fragmentation within the IP profession when it comes to the language barriers. So if you take a patent, for example, you have various legal professionals involved in its creation and ultimately its enforcement. You have a lot of financial professionals involved in its commercialization. And you have, of course, business professionals involved in those processes as well. And then you have the AI and data experts that are approaching, for example, patents from a different perspective, more of a data asset type of perspective. Because as we well know, patents are data-rich documents. Now, what I've seen is that there's a lot of voices and quite a healthy discourse around how we bring IP into the boardroom. The problem is not necessarily the boardroom and that they are rejecting the request to hear the IP department out, but rather that once the IP department get the invitation, they are often not equipped with the right language or the right type of data to have boardroom level conversations. Obviously, the rather extensive suite of various IP intelligence platforms and tools that we have access to today helps. But fundamentally, it's all about that value narrative. Why does IP make sense to that particular stakeholder group? And how can it serve their business objectives? You did also mention, overregulation at the very wrong time or point in time. To some extent, overregulation is probably always excessive. It's in the name, right? And also something that hampers innovation. But we are currently seeing legislation such as the EU AI Act, which, we have to give the legislators the benefit of the doubt. It's probably with a full host of good intentions. Now, I think that the EU AI Act addresses the symptom rather than the root cause of why AI needs some form of regulatory supervision or interference. And that is fundamentally that AI, or the IP of AI, the neural network architectures, the training algorithms, the weight parameters.
IP within IP, what data?
The IP within the IP is simply not something which current IPR regimes can accommodate. So the default is trade secrets. And then it becomes an over reliance on secrecy, which clearly results in black boxing and this idea that there's a lack of transparency. We don't understand how these models operate. So the root cause, I would say, is that it's simply that there's not enough of legal regimes and foundations for AI to be protected adequately, where disclosures are actually encouraged and promoted and can be done in a non-detrimental way.
Yeah, like the way it's percolating is that it's kind of cart before the horse in a way, that the EU AI Act was made and probably, legislated at the very early phases, and we can see how much is accelerated since then. And does the requirement to non-disclose, meaning no protections for disclosure, lead to the fear factor of what's happening there because we can't see it, which therefore would lead to more regulation and a kind of like dog chasing his tail kind of way, which is counterintuitive to the whole premise of the patenting structure, which is to promote innovation via disclosure and protection for your right to have come up with that great idea. So what are you seeing in a sense of the kind of driving of decision making? Is it reacting to the current regime, or do you feel that it should be a little bit more revolutionary of pushing back to drive a more open dialogue and more open environment to lead to more innovation?
So when it comes to the AI debate, and in particular IP in the AI context, there's a lot of healthy debate and a vibrant discourse around the IP of the AI input and the IP of the AI output, from authorship to ownership to derivative work to obviously then from scraping and copyright infringement. And I think that is healthy, but also it takes the focus away from the real challenge, which is to understand, if we are having an AI revolution, do that mean that we also need to have an IP revolution? And if that's the case, what would such new IPR regimes look like? We understand what the architectural and foundational assets of an AI model and system truly are, but they don't necessarily correspond with current IPR regimes, as said. So that's a topic I think we should spend a whole episode on exploring. Things like patents for algorithms specifically, design rights for AI model architecture schematics. What would that look like? What would be the time frame? What would be the inventive step? What would be the novelty factor, and so forth? But very little debate is currently held in those domains.
Because how can you prove obviousness in such a new space as well? How many subject matter experts are there? And there's a lot of kind of optimism around that, with some people saying I'm a subject matter expert, but really it's very limiting those that really understand the nuance of some of these AI infrastructures and things that are being delivered. Like we were having a conversation earlier today about Gronk, not Groot, Gronk. And it's just it just goes over your head. So how do you think, let me put a question to you. What would you say is the profile of the company that is doing things the right way, and the profile of a company that is being overly cautious? Is there a big difference between that when it comes to deciding? Like with IP Rally, we have 6 published patents on the process of extracting patent documentation into knowledge graphs. So we've decided to go ahead and go for it and file it, and successfully. But some companies may be very similar and decide, no, we're going to do trade secrets. In your experience, what leads to that decision making?
Now, the benefit of IP Rally is that you are an AI company run by IP experts. So the vast and extensive disclosure required in a patent application is typically a risk. It's a significant risk, I would say, in particular when it comes to something as straightforward to replicate as a mathematical equation, an algorithm, or a schematic of a neural network architecture. So that obviously needs to be considered in great detail, because, as you know, a patent will take its due time before it even is prosecuted and ultimately then granted or rejected. But luckily in your case, you I would assume had all the experts required in-house to make such decisions and understand the trade-offs. I think that many AI companies are simply either not considering IP as part of their competitive asset base. I think they are looking at speed and compute, potentially also data quantity, as those factors that contribute to their control position in the market. Or they are simply not willing to share anything and operate between various layers of confidentiality and secrecy. Now, taking a step back and potentially leaving the AI domain for the time being, I think what we're seeing when PA engages with product companies that want to innovate in new product categories, we can see that if there are competitors in those spaces that do have a sophisticated IP strategy, which has been translated into a rigorous, for example, patent portfolio, the discussion pretty quickly moves from how do we effectively compete against that company to how do we effectively acquire that company. So to put it all in perspective, I think the IP angle here is more than just, do I protect my competitive asset base, and more about what is the vision of this company and how do I get there the quickest? Can IP actually unlock or be a catalyst in us getting there as quickly as possible, quickly and safely as possible?
And a differentiator too, because I think a smart investment decision also takes into account the IP landscape and where that company fits within as well.
And as you were saying, JP, IP data is a massively underutilized source of intelligence and something which fundamentally can augment any decision-making process. So the richness of understanding, and also just the ability in the first place to be able to do this is astonishing. But the richness of being able to define a technology domain with clear boundaries through multifaceted IP search strings and approaches, to understand everything which is happening and at which velocity it is happening within that technology domain, who's doing what, why are they doing it, is astonishing. And right now, that's not something people in general is aware of, that it can indeed benefit not only investment decisions, but also strategic R&D prioritization decisions, product development decisions, and ultimately access to right partners and also access to the right technology type of decisions. It's not about who you are competing against, it's who you can also collaborate with. It's about seeing the world through a different lens, or adding an additional lens to that toolbox of lenses that you have that you approach, let's say, the world of business. And I think that it's equal to financial data. And when we make financial analysis, we of course use a multitude of data sources, because we know that that is what fundamentally creates the rigor required of making these decisions. So for me, in any type of project situation, we leverage various IP analytics and intelligence platforms to quickly, both using AI functionality and capabilities and our human subject matter experts, understand what is going on in a market, who's doing what, and more importantly, where are the white spaces, but also what are the design requirements to truly push innovation in certain spaces, which is often what we are hired to do in the first place with our clients, because it often has to do with, hey, we're doing something for the first time, and we need a trusted, multidisciplinary partner that can take us from idea to having this product sold in the market within a relatively rapid short time frame, and also the ability to then build additional products and services, actually an entire ecosystem of such, on top of those products. So one of our key approaches to product design is not that we design products, we design growth platforms. But you can only do that, tying back to IP, if you actually have the required IP clearance level, meaning it's truly unique and novel, and also your own IP that you have generated as a consequence of that. Because otherwise, it's not going to be a very long-lasting growth platform. IP translates to longevity in that context.
And a comment you said earlier about the speed companies are more focusing on making their systems better, kind of made me think of optimizing, the barrier to this harmonization that we've discussed is potentially when you file the patent, if you get an opportunity for partial disclosure, you get protection of that algorithm, maybe like a kind of like a hidden disclosure where the patent office reviews it and says, great, yeah, that's novel, but we don't have to fully disclose. You can use it, just thinking off the top of my head, is that by the time that patent is published in 18 months, you would be miles ahead of what it was that you filed. So how much of it needs to be maybe more expedited processing for these sort of protections? Is it something that could that be an indicator of why companies are keeping it in-house? And then that leads to the decision-making element that we were just discussing. Like, I see patents as a solution database. A patent is something that's been, or an invention is something that's really been through the ringers, come out the other side. And that is a solution to maybe multiple problems. So how can we, me and you, the evangelists of this, get our listeners to really understand the true value of it?
Good question. That's why we are continuously doing the evangelism required.
Yeah, you tell us
to bring to the masses the gospel that we are singing out loudly. I think it's eloquently put, JP, and I think that one has to approach IP yet again from a multi-dimensional perspective. Sometimes you need a particular type of IPR for the protection of your competitive asset base. But sometimes you need it to deter risk from a third party. Sometimes you need it for market capitalization, multiplication, or amplification. Sometimes you need it for collateralization, or just to be able to tell to the world that something is indeed proprietary and patented.
Yeah, your investors as well, because a lot of these companies are, investor-driven startups.
True.
So.
And as you know, the value of a particular type of IP is not necessarily intrinsic. It's highly contextual and situational. A patent portfolio can one day go from being valued at 0 to be valued at hundreds of millions, if it is indeed that portfolio that makes a countersuit possible in the US to deter risk from an ongoing lawsuit, or for that matter, the missing piece of their otherwise perfect defensive portfolio. So a patent process is equally the exercise of looking inwards to what type of assets do I need to protect, as it is to look outwards, what type of risks do I need to deter or mitigate, and what type of opportunities do I need to capitalize on. And it all starts with understanding what the landscape looks like, right? So, and also just taking a step back again, it's amazing that we can do these things today. The IP intelligence capabilities that we have access to for a fairly reasonable price tag is astonishing. Just 20 years ago, that was beyond comprehension. People couldn't even
10 years ago, even it was just seen as you're doing a Boolean search, find some patents, not can we actually spot a trend out of 5,000 documents and see what the latest innovation for packaging is based on these trends. So that brings us to kind of the subject of today. We've been looking backwards a little bit. Now let's look forwards. What, in your opinion, imagine this, utopia of harmonization, how would that work then? What benefits would that bring to companies, but also to the industry? What would the future be if we achieve this harmonization or this ability to disclose or speeding up the processing of AI documents, etc.?
I think the key benefit would be more human-centered development and deployment of AI, because the trust factors would hopefully be regained and increase as well as a consequence of those disclosures. We would probably stop having certain transparency issues with how these models are both developed, but also the inner workings of the models. In particular, when it comes to the hyper parameters and the weight attributed to each when it comes to rationalizing current affairs and in particular certain political areas. And I think it would also encourage a process in which the wheel does not have to be constantly reinvented, because the beauty of a functioning and well-working patent system is that fundamentally you are sharing with the world your best ideas for them to take on board and continue to develop.
Yeah, to make them better.
To make them better, to make them more accessible for the benefit of all. That's at least from a philosophical perspective, what could be a well-functioning patent system's purest goal and vision. Now, in the realm of AI, I think much of that is true as well. I think that there is a dystopian, and potentially rightfully so, dystopian perception of where we are heading with these type of technologies. And I think that we need to ensure that we are constantly developing AI for people, for humans, for our not only amusement, but for the benefit of us. And I think that it's pretty prevalent. I'm reading a book called Deep Utopia by Nick Bostrom, a professor from Oxford. Don't quote me on that.
What, reading the book or?
Reading the book is definitely something that I'm doing. I know that because it's a pretty impressive piece of work. It's called Deep Utopia, and it focuses on two fundamental AI issues. One is the non-alignment issue, which is if various geopolitical stakeholders disagree on what the actual utility and use case of AI should be, we will end up in a form of Terminator world where we will weaponize AI against each other and ourselves. Then we have an equally pressing issue of equal order of magnitude, which is if we don't effectively deploy AI to solve our most fundamental issues, we are equally screwed. So, not to be a patent exceptionalist, but I do think that in order to achieve, or at least mitigate the risk of that second issue, we need the IPR regimes that allow for the mitigation of the transparency issues.
Yeah. I was like, you said, this revolution, they're calling it the AI revolution, but revolutions inherently are for the benefit of the people. That's why they revolt and drive change. So it's really, really, I think, important to realize the risks of doing nothing. That if it does get more and more insular, it could drive one of those two examples you shared. And also the risks of it turning into a trade secret conundrum. And then you see Google and Waymo, the issues that can happen when you're essentially, with the patent, you have protection of the state. With the trade secret, you only have protection of a contract. Mm-hmm. And would it then drive AI innovation into an open market where they're just like, okay, we'll fully disclose or we're not. And again, looking towards that future, it's important, and hopefully the conversation that can lift off of this example is just to make sure that first off, you have the right IPR, regime in place. But we actually ensure that we don't fall into the traps that could happen if nothing is done, or if any regulators are listening, see what can be done quickly to expedite the updating of some regulatory frameworks around an industry that is growing exponentially fast.
Indeed. I think that's obviously our current North Star when it comes to what type of discourse do we want to create. In particular, AI meets IP, IP meets AI. Because one way, and yet again, probably from the IP exceptionalist's perspective, or at least the IP strategist's perspective, is that AI can be described as very sophisticated IP that uses other forms of IP to sometimes generate new IP. So I think that it is indeed an IP question equally as it is a question about what constitutes good ethics in this space come development and deployment. But yeah, I think, going back to the EU AI Act, I think it is something that addresses a symptom rather than the root cause. And that is problematic. And discussions that we are having with our AI clients, because one thing PA does as well, this is, by the way, why it's impossible to provide a unified narrative around what PA is and their way of working, is because we have experts in every field and they work on pretty exceptional projects generating inventions that truly are breathtaking. And our AI experts, they build rather intelligent systems for what we call the intelligent enterprise. And they work hands-on with these issues. And we are increasingly seeing that, and this was also pointed out in a recent article authored by me and my team, and that is the IP council function has the opportunity of a lifetime to step up and take ownership of certain AI related, in particular, implementation and also the deployment questions and issues. But if they don't, they're going to be completely replaced by AI councils that knows the IP of AI. So it is indeed so that we are entering into a brave new world, and it's really fascinating. And that does not even address the question around AI in IP, which is your domain, which is how you effectively onboard AI solutions to execute IP tasks more effectively and probably more in a more sophisticated manner as well.
Which, like, we've been in the industry long enough. I'm even surprised the speed of acceptance by organizations, where 5 years ago it was, oh, AI, no, we're not touching that. It's too risky. You can't control it. And now organizations looking at using AI to help drafting, to help the conversation. I think at a conference we went to recently around how much AI is supporting patent drafting. I was in Washington, D.C. last year where PTAB was having a conversation about, is spell checker AI? At what level is AI, supporting? And how much is the openness now to embrace AI solutions going to permeate into the thought process to make the right decisions on the topic that we're having today?
Indeed. That's a entire conversation in it of itself, the AI of IP. Yeah. Just taking a step back. I love saying that because it
as you sit,
as I sit, highly contradictory. But I think one aspect of why I'm a big fan of IP intelligence in general and the ability to map and contextualize IP data and present it in a more business savvy way is because it allows for better conversations both within the IP profession, but also with other stakeholders that otherwise would not necessarily be aware of the strategic value of IP. And I think when it comes to the modern IP department, or for that matter, the modern IP strategy service provider, that is a must. It's a default. It's not a default. It's a minimum threshold required.
Yeah, I think minimum threshold is one way to look at it. It's, hopefully it can become the standard. Like when decision making, like you were saying, you look at financial data, going back to uni steep pestle, like, do you meet all 5 requirements to successfully launch a product? Why is IP not a part of that decision making? Why is the data behind it? It's a hill I'm more than happy to die on, because it is just a helicopter going overhead.
Yeah.
That maybe just the joys of London. Why is this data not being taken more seriously? And I think that if the innovation and the ability to innovate, which inherently is driven by the opportunity to safely disclose, is that going to hinder the opportunity for this to even be a viable data source? And even because when you're saying a competitor should be competing, a company should be actually competing with themselves to be the best that they can be. But if you're looking into entering a completely new space, looking at somebody who solved the problem and protected it, giving you that 10, 15x year protection in that space, it's a no-brainer. So what can we do other than going outside with a sign and saying, wake up, to support the knowledge and the comfort and the understanding? Because that may be one of the inherent risks of it, is they may look at patents as a legal document, complex, not as a very good indicator.
Indeed. One thing I do when I speak to product people, marketing folks, or C-suite, is that I say IP only matters if you're successful. If you launch a successful product, IP very much matters. No one's going to come after you and copy a product that doesn't work or a service that doesn't sell. So it only matters if you're successful. But if you haven't thought it through and you get successful, IP as an afterthought does not work. It simply does not work. And if your aim is to indeed become successful, well, then you should consider IP from the get-go. So that clearly gets me the right type of attention that I need to have those conversations. And what is then important to do within your own project team is to translate, for example, IP intelligence data into something that makes sense for them. So if we are designing a new product, you need to present the IP intelligence data in a way which more relates to design requirements rather than legalistic lingo of what one can do and what one can't do. It has to do with removing the legal dimension from the discussion. Because we know that once it becomes a legal subject, it becomes peripheral or just a risk aspect. So here it's about proactively understanding, in this specific case, proactively understanding the design requirements to build something novel and truly unique in a specific product category. And that is something clearly IP intelligence can do, because if you think about it, even though you don't necessarily these days patent your best ideas, I mean, not in the AI space, at least, as we have now discussed at length, you still don't patent by accident. Even if you have quantitative KPIs that only measures the volume of patent applications you file, you don't typically patent by accident. So every single application, every single grant signals some form of market intention. And that in it of itself is a gold mine as well, because you can potentially know what someone's next move is. And in this world, this day and age, that's gold. So the question was probably not answered by what I just said. But
I think it was. Yeah.
Thank you, JP. That's why I like you. You're not only confirmatory, you are affirmatory.
Yeah, no, it was. I don't know what I asked, but it was answered. No, it's which is good. But in the end, and again, a whole nother conversation I think we can have is the fact that you are going to these legal teams that potentially may be at capacity, and then asking them, you're a patent professional, become a data professional and become a narrative professional. So how much can AI tools support the curation of these narratives, maybe off of internal data, to say, legal teams, this is how you can have that conversation? Is that a way to benefit it? But I think that kind of comes down to the conclusion of today's episode, to kind of tie everything together on, what, in my opinion, the imagine if would be. For me, I would say, imagine if AI innovation and IP strategy actually found that perfect balance. What would that do to ensure and enable that this AI revolution is sustainable and actually beneficial?
Indeed. And I think that equilibrium will require mobilization across various disciplines. It will require a new approach on legislative action, regulation in general, but also what constitutes good governance of AI.
I think it just requires an open mind by the regulators, by the inventors, by, I think even, because you would imagine that some patent attorneys who've been doing it for years would be hesitant with everything. Alice was a big kind of kick in the pants back in the 90s, and the EU actually reacted to it positively, driving software innovation in Europe over the US. I don't see the US making that mistake again. You can see with some of the kind of word that's coming out with the, USPTO embracing AI, how much of that is a bureaucratic open mind, but also the companies themselves pushing for the opportunity to disclose. Because what if they become insular with that fear as well?
Indeed, and I think it also has to do with the safeguarding of the human capital. So one inherent risk of over-reliance on trade secrets is that it creates a tax on the human capital and its mobility. Meaning, if you're an employee and you have access to a firm's trade secret and you then want to leave that firm, it puts a limitation on both your ability to continues
really
working in
go
that
anywhere,
space, going anywhere, indeed. And it actually puts the tax on the employees rather than on a company level. So I think that that's an interesting aspect as well, because we need to promote a highly mobile, a highly transparent AI ecosystem, which is not solely driven by your ability to raise capital to then deploy capital in compute.
Well, that's a very non-multidimensional viewpoint. If you're driving all your decision on just one indicator, which is the capital, how much money can we make, that's not very forward thinking. It should be, yeah, are we going to hit our financial forecast, which is another way to say the same thing. But what is the future of this? What derivative can we expand, new market entrants, creating a new market, or take, there's much more than just that one, because a patent or an innovation is actually soon a previous step to the next one. So what would you then say, Carl, in your opinion, after having a great conversation, what would you imagine then? What would your imagine if be then?
Well, I would imagine a world where there's more harmony between the multiple arenas that collectively constitute the IP profession. The legal arena, the business arena, and increasingly now the data arena. And I think that it will be to our detriment if we don't at least aspire to create that form of harmony. And the harmony, I would assume, can be created by aligning interests, but also breaking down certain language barriers. So imagine if, to me, means probably more the pathway of getting there rather than getting there in the first place. I can see a series of things and a particular order of sequence that need to happen. Also simultaneously with other aspects. But nevertheless, it is about setting a collective vision of where we want to bring the IP profession. Because I believe that if we don't, it's going to be to the detriment of how we develop and deploy AI.
Yeah, I think that's really well said and really ties this conversation together. So, Carl, thank you so much for spending some time. I know we usually have this conversation in the pub, so I really thank you coming in the morning to have this conversation. I've learned something. I hope the listeners, and if you're watching as well, you've learned something. Thank you so much to my guest. Thank you to our listeners, and really looking forward to having you on the next episode of RallyCast. But thank you, Carl.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much.